Oops, I did it again. Hello everyone, I am Bo, also known as Q is Too Short, and welcome to the Penthouse. This past weekend, I won the Roominous Rumble again. This is the second Roominous Rumble and I have won both. I am now the best Australian player. This time, instead of playing a deck that I took to premieres constantly leading up to the event, when I had my other win with Morphrost, I brought Lunar Phase, a deck that had no real reason losing a single set during the event. So this deck is something that I've been working on for the past few weeks and has been optimized to a point that I'm fairly satisfied with it, and I'll go over it here. So as with any Lunar Phase deck, Dusk is a core card. Dusk is the card to make your lunar phases not suck. We'll talk about more about the individual lunar phases when we get to them, but most lunar phases you only want to be casting when you have Dusk. Now, the game has progressed to a state where getting all three Dusk out onto the field is incredibly uncommon. Now, it's still your goal to get multiple Dusk out at the same time, but you shouldn't expect all three out at any given point. Usually, if you can get your Dusk to draw you 2 cards, it has done enough work, and so even if it is removed, you still have gotten value out of the card. Moving on to the real star of the show for Lunar Phase now. 3 Werepup, and then 1 Like a Void, and 1 Like a Void Champion of Artemis Escaped from Tartarus. This is the card that really pushes Lunar Phase to being actually competitive now, and alongside the newest Lunar Phase. Werepup is, you really want to be abusing Werepup, as it is able to search any lunar phase, not just full moon or lunar eclipse for its ascension. So we are on a very specific amount of lunar phase ratios to enable us to have Werepup search more targets than just the ones needed for the ascension. Both Like a Voids are included because you will often have games where you ascend into 2 Like a Voids, and the 5 stat line of Escape from Tartarus is quite useful. The effect of it can sometimes be applicable, but not always. I wouldn't really look to activate Champion's effect all that often. And then Moonrise Like a Void gives us a little bit of insurance against counterwinds that we haven't popped with Lunar Eclipse. Rounding out our Alestrals, we have 3 Astrabbit. Same staple as from Moonrise. 3 Astrabbit works very nicely with Dusk, as it is a 5 defense that can help build a wall, as well as being a pseudo search, allowing you to have a bit more agency in which cards get added to your hand. Now, one card that we are not on is Volclipse. This used to be the main win condition of the deck back in Moonrise. You could also have done like Eruption as your main win condition. Neither of those is in the deck anymore, and that's for a few reasons. Eruption, of course, is limited, so usually you aren't able to consistently find multiple Eruptions to, of course, win the game. Volclipse is a bit of an odd one. Although we are up 2 lunar phases from my deck back in Moonrise, we are now on 19 lunar phases. We are only on 7 different names, and we'll go over the 2 that we are not on when we go over the lunar phases. And so Volclipse effect isn't live unless we make some sort of concession elsewhere in the deck, as well as trying to fit the Volclipse in the deck. Volclipse is also a card where sometimes you will find it and it will just not be applicable in the current board state. And when you do need it to win a game, you may not be able to find it. Like, the draw power in this deck is quite strong, but you are never really getting to a situation where you are drawing your entire deck. So that's why Volclipse has been omitted from this deck. Moving on to our actual lunar phases, starting off with the engine pieces. These are ones that are used to help develop Dusk, or ones that you want to only be casting when you have a Dusk. We have 3 Waning Gibbous. This one is the one that shuffles a lunar phase from Underworld or hand back into the deck to search for a Dusk. 3 First Quarter, the counterman that draws a card, and 3 Waning Crescent, the one that heals 2 lunar on cast. Usually you want to be using these when you have a Dusk on field, especially Waning Crescent in First Quarter. Both of these are very, very weak without being able to recoup some sort of resource. Waning Gibbous, your only condition is that you have a lunar phase in Underworld. And usually that means having found the Voldusk to get one of these other lunar phases into Underworld, or finding a Werepup and using the lunar phase that you find off a Werepup to ascend. If you have to use like a new moon or another card in order to just get a lunar phase into Underworld, it's not quite as good. You also always want to be shuffling from Underworld because that means that you did cast the lunar phase in order to get value from it. Moving on to our main interaction pieces. 3 new moon, 3 lunar eclipse. These are Earthquake and Hurricane in this deck. And of course, we are not on Earthquake or Laurels within the 55 cards. So New Moon has to put a lot of weight in that case. These are also both searchable off of Werepup, and if you have Voldusk on field, these are also resource generation. So usually during a turn and when you have a Voldusk on field, usually you will be using one of your engine lunar phases, whether that be one of your engine lunar phases for your first Voldusk activation. Then you will be using one of these two to finish out the turn, to actually interact with your opponent. And that's, you usually use this first in order to get more options for your second lunar phase. Say you're in a position where you have a new moon, but you don't really want to have to discard anything in your hand. You can usually fire off one of these lunar phases, draw off of Voldusk, and then find something for your new moon. Sometimes you'll have a lunar eclipse in your hand, it's just okay in that situation, and you'd much rather find a new moon. Fire off one of these engine pieces, find your new moon, you're off to the races. So we are also on a few extra lunar phases, and those are for some very specific reasons. Starting off, 2 full moon. This is up 1 from Moonrise, and that's mainly because we are playing more for Werepup. Being able to find full moon or lunar eclipse without needing to search it off of Werepup means that we have much more tailored searches off of that Werepup. It can be another lunar eclipse to set up future turns. It can be new moon in case we need removal. It can be Waning Gibbous to search for a Voldusk. It can be Waning Crescent if we really need healing. And then it can also be our last lunar phase, which we'll get to in a second. Full moon also has a little bit of extra utility in this deck because of some of the other options that I've put into the deck, and especially when we get into the side deck. And our final lunar phase, 2 Final Quarter. This is also up 1 from Moonrise. This is the one that allows you to send 2 lunar phases from your deck to the Underworld. This effect is not ever going to happen because there are 3 reasons that you would ever use it. 1, set up Volclips. Volclips is not in the deck. 2, set up Waxing Crescent, a counter rune that gives more attack for each lunar phase in Underworld. That's never happening. 3, you want to thin your deck for whatever reason. It's not very applicable in this deck because you always want to be drawing into your lunar phases. So why is it here? Purely because of its discard effect. Being able to recoup 1 spirit when you discard it is really nice based on the way that I personally play, and gives the deck a little bit more longevity. The deck is surprisingly expensive still, and you really want to be using your Voldusk effects to be drawing rather than healing if at all possible. So this just gives us a little bit more sustainability, and is one that you might search up off a Werepup if you already have New Moon in hand. And generally, just having a lunar phase that you want to discard rather than another card in your hand is useful. So the 2 lunar phases that are not in the deck right now are Waxing Gibbous and Waxing Crescent. These 2 lunar phases are just not good enough anymore. They are meant to be the interaction, the counter runes that actually interact with your opponent, but back in Moonrise, they used to be good enough. Back when Eddie was the most popular counter to Voldusk, back when Zeus was actually fairly common, that kind of thing. So back when Eddie was the most popular answer to Voldusk. And both of these allow you to counter Eddie quite nicely. As with Waxing Gibbous, you can change your guy back into the proper position. With Waxing Crescent, you can make your Voldusk bigger than the Eddie and force the Eddie to die. But in this current format, these cards are not good enough anymore changing your position of your Celestial, rarely ever changing the position of your opponent's Celestial, is not good enough anymore, because people aren't really main decking Tsunamis. Whale is the most common answer to Voldusk now, and usually Celestials that do threaten your Voldusk get over the 5 defense naturally, so changing the position of one of your guys isn't worth it. It does technically allow you to play through card effect destruction, which is just not applicable anymore now that Rise from the Shadows exists, because Rise from the Shadows does the exact same thing but for much cheaper, and then it doesn't put your Celestial in the position that it doesn't want to be in. With Waxing Gibbous, if you're protecting your Voldusk from an Earthquake, you are being forced to put it into attack where it can just be run over in combat, and so you need something else to supplement this card, which is not enough. Waxing Crescent, although its attack bonus is significant, it's not significant enough at the time. You need a certain number of lunar phases in the underworld, and although we are on 19 of them, you also aren't getting them into the underworld quickly enough for this to be super significant. And there will be games where you just find this and it's just sitting in your rune row, just completely dead because you are just not getting enough lunar phases into Underworld. So that's why these two have been omitted from the deck. Moving on to our other runes that are not named Lunar Phase. 2 Temple of the Moon. This is where Full Moon gets a little bit more utility, because now Full Moon can enchant more to our Celestials in order to make them a little bigger. This is mainly to contest Stadium Wars. Being able to break an opponent's stadium and just have 2 to 3 turns at minimum to just be able to not have, just having 2 to 3 turns of minimal offensive pressure from an opponent is very, very nice and allows you to develop your board a little bit easier. Next up, 2 Ambrosia. Like I said, the deck is still surprisingly expensive. You really want to be drawing off of Voldusk, and this is still the reason to be drawing off of Voldusk, because this card will just give you more resources than if you just heal back with Voldusk. Of course, 2 copies because it is now semi-limited. Then, counter runes that are not named Lunar Phase, 3 Gorgons, 3 Rise from the Shadows. This seems very low, but there's a reason for that. Most of the counter runes kind of suck right now, or this deck specifically. Tsunami, of course, is very good, just because of how common Fish is. Tsunami is often really dead. Shield is really good if you're playing against Ascension-focused decks, as you can oftentimes just bounce the Ascension back to hand and blink the turn. The problem is that many decks are also very adept at swarming the field and threatening a Voldusk with 2 or more Celestials, and so you really need multiple shields in order to fully blink the turn, and that gets way too expensive, and in testing I found myself running out of spirits when I did open significant amounts of shield. These 2 cards allow you to blink turns the best, as Gorgon's Gaze, of course, stops attacks from Ascensions. It stops effects like Galaxy from changing combat math. Rise from the Shadows does the same thing. You can let your Voldusk die, bring it back with Rise from the Shadows, and now you have the 5 defense again, and it resets effects like Galaxy as well. So Rise from the Shadows is really, really good. It's also really, really good with Like Void. It's being able to just constantly have a 6/5 stick to the field is super, super strong. Moving on to our Spirit deck. We are on 13 Lunar. 13 Lunar, 4 Thunder, 2 Water, 1 Frost. So the Thunders, of course, is a little bit high for just 3 Astra, but that's mostly because we are getting in stuff for the side deck. That's also why the 2 Waters here. Process here is not for our Cryoblast, it's for the opponent's Cryoblast. You could easily fit this in as like 14th Lunar, because it's just not as applicable as it was back in Moonrise, where you used to only have Full Moon to ascend into Moonrise like a Void, which was really susceptible to Cryoblast. Now you can just get into the 6/5. That's pretty resistant to Cryoblast already, and the chances of you getting into Moonrise like a Void with an additional Spirit so that you have immunity to both counter runes and to Cryoblast, is much less likely with Lunar Eclipse being in. So, like I said, you can put this as a 14th Lunar. It didn't really matter if it was or wasn't for me. I just know in testing that I particularly liked being able to make like Void resistant to both Galaxy Champ and Cryoblast together. That was something that was not uncommon in my testing. So that's why it's still in. Moving on to our side deck, if you know anything from my Moonrise list, you would know that I had a Smokescreen into Lunar Aggro, and alongside some 5 cards for Eruption gameplay. Now that Eruption's no longer a feasible win condition, our entire side deck is dedicated to the Smokescreen. So, of course, the 3 Nabi, Doppelgator, 3 Specteris is pretty standard for any Lunar Aggro list. Then it changes up a little bit with 3 Jolton. We are Smokescreening into Full Moon is a battle trick. So, of course, our Jolton targets are in the main deck, being the Temple of the Moon, and this will allow us to find our temples and contest stadium wars, as well as turning on Full Moon to actually be a counter rune that actually does something, especially since we only have 6 real counter runes in the main deck. Rounding out our guys, 2 Galaxy Champ. This, I never found it through my tournament run. I don't know if it's particularly strong or weak. It just feels like the best thing to slot in this place as a good aggro card. It does not have as good of synergy with Full Moon as all of these other cards do, which is why it's not at 3 copies here, but also because I wanted to fit some other cards in the side deck. Third Full Moon is one of them. Of course, we want to be playing Full Moon as a battle trick, so adding in the third Full Moon is pretty easy. And then 2 Shield of Achilles. This is to help counteract the counter runes route that we would have due to not having Boldust draws in the deck. And this would bring us up to 8 plus 3 Full Moons for a counter rune lineup. Overall, this theory worked out very nicely. Nabi, Specteris, and Jolton were really strong throughout the tournament. I really wish whenever I sided into this that I found Nabi more often. But yeah. I also played against Lunar a couple times, which is something that I wasn't really expecting. And so having these extra shields in this side deck to replace temples was actually very useful. Now, how does the Smokescreen siding pattern look like for this deck? Because we're siding in basically 15 cards all at the same time. And it's fairly straightforward. We side out of the 2 final quarter, especially since we're trying to reduce the number of lunar phases in the deck. This was a fairly easy place to cut. The Full Moons and Lunar Eclipses stay in the deck because we want to be triggering Werepup as well as having Full Moon as a battle trick. We cut 1 New Moon. That's because we just needed 1 more spot to side into the 15th card. That was the easiest spot. Leaving the New Moons in the deck also allows us to have some sort of Earthquake in the deck. It's not the most live ever, but it does have a little bit of synergy with Specteris. Of course, we side out of the 3 Waning Gibbous, 3 First Order, and 3 Waning Crescent. Our engine pieces are not quite as strong, especially since we are also siding out of all 3 Bulldusk. So these are the 15 cards that we side out of for the Smokescreen into the Full Moon is a battle trick deck. And it creates a fairly competent deck, with the only real outlier being the 2 New Moons and just the absurd amount of Full Moons in the deck. But considering you can only change 15 cards of the deck, I feel like this was very powerful. So, why did Lunar Phase work in this tournament? Well, because the theory behind this is that Voldusk is a 5 defense. This 5 defense was not significant through most of Firestorm and into the early parts of Lifestream, because there was just so many ways to bypass the 5 defense. Now, Fish is the most popular deck, and Fish do not have the tools to deal with 5 defense very easily. Their options really come down to basically Galaxy exactly alongside some of their other tech choices, whether that be their Ascensions or if they're running Stadium in May. Some people are playing Eddies, for instance, but the Fish alone do not have the capacity to deal with 5 defense Full Dusk. The second thing is that Like a Void is just really, really powerful. 6 attack on a quick ascension off of a single card is very, very good. And so, especially when pairing it with Rise from the Shadows, getting these guys to stick to the field for multiple turns is really devastating for opponents. And finally, just in-engine Hurricane and Earthquake. Being able to search both of these cards is very, very powerful, and they both essentially act as fish removal. Lunar Eclipse, of course, being able to clear the way for your Like Voids, and then New Moon being able to just flat out remove a target. The smokescreen aspect is also a huge part. Navi and Specteris particularly are particularly potent into fish, and so being able to smokescreen out of Voldusk, which is particularly weak to many answers that people have in their side decks currently, into cards that really don't care about those silver bullets, is really powerful. And so having 2 different sides that you really want different counter runes into allows you to just have an edge in some games. Spoiled Fruit and Poison Nectar kill Voldusk outright and just stop your development very easily. Navi and Specteris, if you just have a Poison Nectar or Spoiled Fruit set, these guys can just swing and just clear a guy for free. In the case of Navi and Specteris, you really want your counter runes to affect combat, your Tsunamis, your Shields, your Argos. Voldusk does not care about that because it just does not swing into those things. And of course, Lunar Eclipse being able to pop any of those back row to clear the way for your Navis, to be able to help develop your Voldusk through Silver Bullet, through PTA, is quite useful, allowing your Like Voids to actually swing over your opponent's Celestials. So all of that combined enabled Lunar Phase to really be quite powerful. Now, I only played against Fish twice throughout the tournament. It was my one loss in Swiss, and that was mainly because Fish is just the best deck in the room. It really did come down to, do I New Moon early to get spirits off the field and stop the draws? Or do I hold it for the Ascension that actually does threaten Like a Voids and Voldusk? It was a rock on a hard place situation. But against Spicy Sausage in top 4, this theory worked out perfectly. Voldusk completely walled him out. Like a Void was just too big to get over. He had no answer for it, and he said that he had no answer for it in his main deck, and so within like 3 or 4 turns, he scooped. Game 2, I just overwhelmed him with Navis. I drew all 3 Navis in the opener, top decked into the Doppelganger, funnily enough, but just that consistent pressure was too much for him to handle. So against other decks, Lunar Phase can hold its own if piloted correctly. I am probably the best Lunar Phase player in the game, and I know how to really help develop the Voldusk, when it is best to fire each Lunar Phase, which Lunar Phases to search off of where by any point. So I'm able to wiggle myself out of certain situations. Of course, the smokescreen is also quite potent into a lot of decks, as most decks are not lunar or solar. Speaking of solar, solar is probably the worst matchup for this deck. It's because of a number of different things. One, Temple just makes solar guys just bigger than Voldusk, can make things bigger than Like a Void, and so you often have to constantly use resources to just keep your board established, and you just don't have enough to really push back. 2, Novacore is an issue, as it not only pops a card on the field, but also then threatens your 5 defense guys, because it will be a 6 under the Temple. So essentially every turn that Novacore comes down, it is threatening 2 Alestrals, and they can get Novacores out 3 turns in a row fairly consistently. 3, you don't remove their guys consistently enough. You really need to keep Solar off of as many Alestrals as possible to stop them from hard ascending into whatever secondary win condition they have, whether that be Celestia or Lustron or something else. And this deck just does not threaten that consistently enough, especially since their Alestrals oftentimes get just as big, if not bigger, been like void. So that's the deck profile for Lunar Phase. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys at Worlds.